Hi there, BookTube, and I'm here to give you one of my favourite videos of the year, because this is a Victober announcement video when I say Victober is back again in October 2024. I'm sure you know what Victober is, but just in case, it's a month-long opportunity to enjoy and celebrate Victorian literature. That is works by British and Irish writers that were published in the reign of Queen Victoria, so that's 1837 to 1901. Now, the Victober police are not going to come round if you have to read something from 1836 or 1902, but you get the general principle. And to take part in Victober, all you have to do is read one thing, one poem, one novel, one novella, one short story from that period. But we presume that you want more, because the lovely thing about Victober is that it works for Victorian literature beginners and hardcore Victorian literature enthusiasts. And this year's hosts are, of course, Katie of Books and Things, who started Victober, Kate Howe, Marissa of Blatantly Bookish, and myself. No Petra this year because she's having a break from BookTube. So we have a group read, 4 challenges set by each of the hosts, and a group or shared challenge. And in this video, I'm going to run through all of those and then give you at the end some particular suggestions for my challenge. So let's start with the group read. Now, a very democratic process. We voted for this in a poll on Katie's channel. And what we wanted to do this year was suggest some slightly less well-known Victorian authors for you. So all Victorian women writers who are kind of well-known but not the obvious, okay? And the eventual winner, by a very narrow margin over Harriet Martineau's Deerbrook, was The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Now, if you don't know Braddon, she's probably best known for Lady Audley's Secret, which is sort of epitomises the Victorian sensation novel. You know, novels about shocking behaviour, secrets, extramarital sex, sensation. And The Doctor's Wife is kind of one of those. It's about, it was published in 1865, but was serialised in 1864. And it's about a woman who loves reading novels and who's kind of frustrated in her marriage to a nice but dull provincial doctor. It's not one I've read, and I'm quite excited to read it. That's the group read. Now, we will be reading 2 chapters a day from the 1st of October to the 18th of October. Then the discussion for it will be on Discord. So there's a Discord server for Victober. I'll put the link to it below. It's going to have the group read as a thread of discussion, all the challenges. There'll be threads to talk about those, and but also places to make recommendations to each other, share Victorian literature resources. You know, it's a lovely place. Last year it was vibrant, and so do join it. And Discord is free and easy to use once you get into it. So don't be put off if you're unfamiliar with Discord. So that was a group read. Let's talk about the challenges. Now, Marissa's challenge is to read a Victorian work which was first published in serialised form. So that was an enormously common thing in Victorian times for books, novels in particular, but also long works of poetry and some non-fiction, to be initially published in magazines weekly or more often monthly. Dickens was particularly known for that, but lots of Victorian writers were serialised. And of course, if you read the group read, you'll be ticking off Marissa's challenge as well, but she'll make other splendid suggestions. She'll also be letting you know about a couple of really useful online resources which kind of show things that were serialised and where the splits were, you know, which month they were serialised in, so that when you're reading, you can kind of mark where the breaks were and you know, read like a Victorian, think, oh, now I'd have to wait a month for the next bit, and does it end with a cliffhanger? You know, how does the author sort of use that structure? Thinking about how authors use different structures and form brings me to Katie's challenge, because Katie's challenge is to read a Victorian book that plays with form in some way. Now, you know, Victorian era was when the novel, the British, or the novel in English, really came into its own. And there's lots of experimentation. Epistolary novels, so, you know, novels in letters, novels in diary form, novels in other documents, like you know, Dracula is, you know, includes all sorts of things like transcripts of supposed recordings. Another option would be a novel in verse, like Aurora Leigh, for example. Books of connected short stories, that would be another possibility. Katie will have even more suggestions for you. Kate's challenge is to read a Victorian book where religion is a component of the story. Now that sounds like, oh, will there be lots of choice? Actually, it's almost hard to find a Victorian book that where religion doesn't feature, because it was, you know, so central to Victorian society, one way and another, that, you know, clergymen pop up again and again in novels of all sorts, but also kind of personal religion and people's sort of ideas and judgments sort of based on that. And even you know, Victorian authors like, say, George Eliot, who was sort of non-conformist in her view of religion, you know, still you get it in her novels, like, you know, Daniel Deronda has the Jewish faith, or, you know, Romola is a medieval fanaticism. So, you know, lots of choice, and Kate will give you some lovely suggestions. So let's come to my challenge. Okay, mine is to experience the Victorian theatre, so or Victorian drama. So to read or watch or listen to a Victorian play. I'll make some suggestions for that in a minute, but first let me explain our shared challenge, our group challenge, as it were. And that's a bit of a special one this year, because this year, since last Victober, we have lost two booktubers who were real Victober enthusiasts, you know, who always made Victober related videos and had bookish interests that kind of encompassed Victorian literature, and so we're honouring them in our shared challenge. So we're inviting you to read either or both, something by Wilkie Collins, who was particularly loved by Jennifer Brooks, or something by Conan Doyle, who was particularly loved by Alice of the Giant Bookshelf. She loved Sherlock Holmes stories in particular, but, you know, anything by Conan Doyle. So what could you read for that? Wilkie Collins and Conan Doyle both wrote both novels and short stories. So if you want to just sort of dip into this challenge, you could read a short story by either of them. The Sherlock Holmes short stories are great on audio. Stephen Fry has done a sort of brilliant recording of a whole tremendous selection of them. Wilkie Collins would be a good, well, in fact, either of them could work for Katie's challenge. Wilkie Collins had quite a tendency to write novels that are sort of epistolary, or you know, for example, The Moonstone is like a series of documents, sort of letters or testament almost, written by different people. So that would be an example. Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories use a framing device, which would be another way of kind of meeting Katie's challenge, because they're supposedly, you know, Dr. Watson relating his experiences investigating mysteries and crimes with Sherlock Holmes. So lots of options, and we'll all 4 hosts will kind of come up with some more suggestions for the group challenge as well. So what could you do for my challenge about experiencing Victorian drama? First up, you could read a play. Now, you might think, is it easy to get hold of Victorian plays? Yes. Although they might, you will find them to buy, but what I would say is there's a whole slew of Victorian plays available on Project Gutenberg, absolutely free. You can download them as an ebook onto a phone or a tablet, and because it's their plays, they're not too long to read on like a phone, so even if you're not someone who generally enjoys reading an ebook, that might work for you. And I'll talk about some of the Who in a minute. Watch, yes, why not watch one? Obviously, the chances of there being a Victorian play in your local theatre in the month of October are low, but so many film and TV adaptations of Victorian plays out there. Have a bit of a search. I will make a video with some sort of suggestions sort of early in Victober. There's BBC dramas. Try YouTube. You will find someone there. It's more accessible than you might think. Finally, how about listening to something? Have a look on Audible or your audio book provider of choice. You will find there's again lots of choice. Many radio dramas have been made of Victorian plays, and again, YouTube you will find quite a few. So there's some free and purchasable options out there. But who should you be looking for? Who are the Victorian playwrights whose works you might want to dip into? Now, top of the list every time. When you talk about Victorian drama, has to be Oscar Wilde. Wilde, one of the greatest Victorian writers, and he's best known for his plays. Obviously, he wrote a novel, he wrote some stories, but his plays are, Wilde at his best. And if you haven't read or watched or listened to The Importance of Being Earnest at the point when you're watching this video, then my one exhortation to you this Victober is do that, if nothing else, because boy, you won't regret it. Of course, there are many other Oscar Wilde possibilities. Tilly and I have made some discussing drama videos together about, I think, 4 different Victorian plays, and one of those is An Ideal Husband by Oscar Wilde, or you could go for his more sort of esoteric drama, Salome. So, a few good choices there. The other kind of big hitter of Victorian drama, I suppose, is George Bernard Shaw. Tilly and I talked about Mrs. Warren's Profession last October, but whole range that you could read by Shaw. One thing to bear in mind, a sort of a warning here, is that some of his best known plays actually were published in Edwardian times. And, for example, Pygmalion, it's set in the Victorian era, but it's technically an Edwardian play. Having said that, if you want to watch or read or listen to Pygmalion, go ahead, why not? And nothing will be lost by that. But plenty of his were technically Victorian. Now, those two are probably the big hitters. And let's say if you haven't read or listened to or watched something by one of them, then, I'd say make that your priority. But who else was really popular in Victorian theatre? Well, one thing I would say is think about Gilbert and Sullivan, who wrote Victorian musical theatre, kind of musical comedies like The Mikado, like HMS Pinafore, like The Pirates of Penzance. Really good ones to catch on film. You could also alternatively watch the film Topsy Turvy, brilliant film about the pair of them and about the time running up to the first production of the Mikado. Really enjoyable, and will give you a flavour of the Mikado, as well as a bit more understanding about how Victorian theatre worked, particularly musical theatre. Then, one of the most successful Victorian playwrights was someone that you may not have heard of, but, you know, is worth trying out, and that's Arthur Wing Pinero. His play, The Second Mrs. Tanqueray, was a cause célèbre, you know, slightly scandalous, really popular, stayed on stage for, you know, hundreds of performances. Again, Tilly and I made a video about that one, so I'll link to that below in case you want to know more about that. Then, if we think of Wilde in connection with sort of humorous Victorian plays, but probably the most successful Victorian comic play was Charlie's Aunt by Charles Brandon. Again, Tilly and I made a video about it. You will not regret it if you watch Charlie's Aunt, or read it or listen to it. I would really go for a performance, you know, whether video or audio of that if you can, because it, you know, it could have you in stitches. Now, at this point, I suspect some people who watch my channel regularly will be thinking, this is a bit odd, Roz, because you haven't recommended any Victorian women playwrights. Now, there is a reason for that. Whereas in the 18th century, you get, and very beginning of the 19th century, you get quite a few successful women playwrights. In the Victorian era, there really aren't. I mean, there are, you know, if you search for Victorian women playwrights, you'll find a list of names, but can you find copies of anything that they wrote? Virtually impossible. It feels as if in the Victorian era, women writers were somehow steered themselves, I don't know, into novels and poetry and short stories, and kind of abandoned writing for the theatre. Why? I'm not sure. You know, I'll see if I can do a bit more thinking about that. You know, it's not that Victorian novelists didn't sometimes also write plays. You know, Dickens wrote plays. That would be another option. You could read one of his. Wilkie Collins did. Yeah, lots of them did. But weirdly, yeah, you're not going to find a play by Mrs. Gaskell or George Eliot or the Brontes or you know, well, you know, virtually any Victorian woman novelist. If you know one that I could read, point me in that direction. And if you've got an understanding of why there are just not Victorian women playwrights, I would love to hear more. Interestingly, in America, there were a number of successful 19th century women playwrights. So, you know, what was different that was going on here? Anyway, that's my Victober announcement. I will be back with Victober content, including something more about drama during the course of Victober. Really look forward to seeing all your TBRs. You can give me a sneak preview in the comments, or certainly let me know if you're going to be joining us, whether that's reading one thing or multiple.